So we've got 12 o'clock. We're going to give it a few minutes to let our participants get in, and then we will get started. We still have a few more trickling in, so we'll give it just a minute longer. We had our first question in the Q&A already from our fearless leader asking, what is a soybean? So we will we'll save that tough one for the end.
The dicot.
Think when they get wet.
Well, we've got quite a few people on, so we'll go ahead and get started. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And of course, a special thank you to our three guests here. We got Senator Jason Bean from Southeast Missouri, Representative Brad Pollitt from Pettis County, and Representative Mike Hafner from Cass County. And appreciate you guys joining us. And as you can see, Mike's on the road, so we will, if we tend to lose them from service, we'll make sure we get them back for the important questions. But there's a lot of experience and knowledge on this call about session, and we're going to dive into some specific issues important to rural Missouri, but it's really open to anything these gentlemen worked on. And we want to have a casual conversation for the listeners, just so you know, and we're going to hit some high points. We'll go ahead and kick this off to talk about the appropriations process. Many of you listening may know, but if you don't, this session we had historic levels of funding. A lot of that was due to the federal relief packages that were sent down from Congress, but also the states had some really strong receipts coming in from our general revenue collections. And so that's given an opportunity to get some projects done. And so, the first one I think would be good to touch on, Representative Pollitt, if you'd like to. There were several things in the budget for the state fair. Many of those I know you personally worked on. So if you'd like to touch on some of those, we can get it kicked off.
That'd be great. Thanks, Casey, for having me, and thanks everybody for joining. Yeah, the Missouri State Fair, of course, we know that's the #1 ag showcase in the state of Missouri. And for way too many years, the Missouri State Fair had been neglected financially, to the point where we only had one or two trucks that were actually working like they were supposed to work, and a number of our buildings had become somewhat disrepair as far as roofs and whatnot. And when Governor Parson became governor, and when I became state representative, the fair really became a priority. And since that time, we really had record funding that's went into the Missouri State Fairgrounds. We built 2 years ago, we built the new core governor's building out there. Instead of that tent was costing somewhere around $45,000 or $50,000 a year to rent. And Nucor Steel, who came into Sedalia 3 years ago, made a $300 million infrastructure investment, employed 450 people. They donated steel to that. And we've got a nice building now that's an open building that we for a number of things. And we got a lot of capital improvements put into the fairgrounds last year and the year before. Well, this year there's $44 million plus designated for the Missouri State Fair. One of that is a $38 million indoor arena. The whole concept of that arena is to maybe down the road, which is going to take some more investments of enticing the junior rodeo and some of those national rodeos to actually consider Missouri and Pettis County and Sedalia Missouri State Fairgrounds as a venue or potential to have some events there. And, we also have the Stud Ram show that begins here in 2 or 3 weeks. It's a huge show, and it brings over well over $1 million worth of revenue into our community. They're here for a week, and last year it was down because of COVID. We hope those numbers will come back up. And about a year and a half ago, I'd heard that maybe the land west of the Missouri State Fairgrounds and south of State Fair Community College may be for sale. I think it was 15 years ago. The family that owned that land was interested in possibly selling that to the fairgrounds, and somehow through the process of governing, which we know what happens in that last week, that fell apart, and it's kind of laid dormant for 12 or 15 years. And so I contacted the sisters that owned it, and they said, they were interested in selling it. It's 400 acres. It's $10,000 an acre, which we've had Pettis County crop ground sell in the last year for over 11,000. This ground is the only non-developed ground in this area. It is directly east of one of the oldest subdivisions we have in Pettis County, Walnut Hills. And they actually were contacted by some realtors in Kansas City and Pettis County wanting to buy the ground to build houses on. And those sisters, they'd given me a commitment that they would hold it, and they were true to their word. And working with the governor's office, working with the Fair Commission and the State Fair Foundation, and of course all the ag groups that are involved in this, the governor agreed, and we got to keep it in the budget. $1 million for Missouri State Fair, $1 million for the college, and then each would have to match that, a 50-50 match. And that money stayed in, and the governor signs it. The college has their money ready to go. They're raring to go. They're very excited about expanding their agriculture program out there at the college. And already talked to some ag groups about, they said they would love to do field plots, genetics, and, plant anything that you guys would like to plant there, to do some testing on that. And actually talk to the crop insurance folks a little bit. I have a relative that's involved with that, and they would love to plant some crops and bring those guys and gals in for a couple of days of professional development, then take their little hail machine out there and beat those crops up and have those folks look at them to adjust them. And so we're really excited about what's going on with the college, with their land, and the Missouri State Fair. There's just all kinds of possibilities that could go on out there. So we're excited about that. And then you got the really exciting stuff about sewer and water that needs to be worked on. We got water pipes, we got sewer problems out there that just have been neglected for a number of years. So this money is going to really help with that aspect, as well as in the budget, there was money put in to increase the salaries of the folks that work during the Missouri State Fair. I'm telling you, my wife had been involved with the fair for 30 years as parking and admissions supervisor, and just hired 270 people for 11 days. What the fair was willing to pay those folks had become impossible. And so my wife is now retired from that, but they'll be able to pay those part-time or those 11-day fair people a little bit more money. And there's money in there to put a fence around the ground once it's purchased. And there's also money to put, I think, 600 additional campsites, which will put us over 2,400 campsites for the fair. And every year we've got a waiting list of 400 or 500 folks that really would like to come to the fair and camp, but we just run out of sites because we've got close to 1,900 sites out there. And so a lot of exciting things can happen. And I just see a vision for the Missouri State Fairgrounds that could be really special once we get the land purchased and build the indoor arena, and just so many possibilities that hopefully somebody with a vision will take that and really think about what could be the showcase for this state on even a bigger venue than it is now.
Well, I think, the people of Pettis County are lucky to have you to fight for that, and all Missourians actually. And State Fair contributes a lot to the state economically. And we did have a question come up, Brad, and it was, is the 400 acres on the public campground side?
It is on the outer campground. So it's west of the fair, it's south of the college, west of the fairgrounds. And there's 400 acres that's kind of squares off there. The college will get 197 of that. The fair will get 200 of that. And then I've given my word that our local ambulance district can buy 3 acres, and that's all been approved by the governor's office and by Ag Director Chin. We need to put we got a roundabout out there that's that's west of the college. And we're going to the county's committed to put a through road. So during the fair, Clarendon, the road that runs between the campground and the swine barn, that during the fair, that can be shut off. So there will be through traffic from the community there. They can go roundabout. And we need to put an ambulance building out there and post an ambulance. We have a number of nursing homes, assisted living, and residential care on that side of town. It takes an ambulance about 20-25 minutes sometimes to get there. And they'll place an ambulance there that can get to those places in 5 minutes, which will be just a great thing for our community. And I know the governor's office and the governor were very excited that we were also putting something like that into this plan that'll be beneficial to the community as a whole and to those families who have folks in nursing homes and residential care.
That's great. Thank you for that answer. And I know that our farmers on our board, we've talked about the partnership with the college there, and agronomic research is fundamental to what we do, especially on the checkoff side. So we look forward to bringing that opportunity in there. And as we talk about agronomic research, Senator Bean, you've got the Fisher Delta Center down there where a lot of that research goes on. And I know you've worked pretty hard in the budget process since you got elected to make some upgrades and stuff. Why don't you take some time to explain to the listeners what you're working on down there?
Oh, absolutely. And good to see everybody this afternoon. Hope everybody's having a good day out in the field. I know we are here in Southeast Missouri, but it looks like we're about to get some rain coming in this weekend. But Delta Center's always been, a soft spot in my heart. One of the largest research centers in the University of Missouri system, a little over 1,100 acres. And so last year we were able to appropriate $1 million general funding to the Fisher Delta Research Center, along with another $900,000 to the greenhouses. This year, we were able to do another $1 million for general funding. Representative Pollitt was talking about, at the state fair, old pipes and all that. And the Fisher Delta Research Center is kind of in the same boat with that. I mean, windows need to be replaced, HVAC system, aging center. So that can be used for a variety of things. Also, $1 million this year got appropriated for the Soils Lab. Soils Lab was once at the Delta Center. They actually moved that back to Columbia, and there's been a push to bring that back to Southeast Missouri. Really important for Southeast Missouri, a lot of varied soil types. So soil testing is a big deal there. So like I say, glad to get that money back. And then another $120,000 going directly to rice research this year. And we're here on the soybean podcast or whatever. And, rice is a big part of Southeast Missouri agriculture and a great rotation of crops with soybeans. So very proud to get that. So had another good year. And also just kind of note something that's really important at the Fisher Delta Research Center is the soybean breeding program. And I'll say this, I'll put my farmer hat on. I really appreciate all the support of Missouri Soybean Association, Missouri Soybean Merchandising Council, and their support of that breeding program. So anyway, that kind of is where the Delta Center money was. I'm going to mention something too that I know soybeans worked on with us with $4 million coming to something we're going to talk about a little bit later in the soy processing plant going to be coming to Pemiscot County, but I know that's for a later conversation. But so that kind of wraps up my, as far as the appropriations projects on the ag side.
No, I'm glad you brought that up too. And thanks for your shout out to the research that's done down there. I mean, the public breeding is extremely important to bringing that research to the farm. And so it's something we're always excited to do every year. And, you talk about the $4 million that was in the budget, and a lot of people worked on that. And Representative Hafner, although he did not work directly on that appropriation, he said it for 3 years as he's advocated for biodiesel in the legislature, knowing how important our Missouri biodiesel industry is. And although this will be a almost record-sized 60 million bushel processing facility in Southeast Missouri, it's not going to have a biodiesel plant attached to it, but you can go ahead and guarantee the oil that is turned out of that is going to find its way most likely down the Mississippi, and it's going to head towards a oil refinery down there where they're going to make a product called renewable diesel. And Representative Hafner is very familiar with that. And we'll probably wait to get into that specific conversation when we talk about the omnibus ag bill. But I do want to thank, our CEO, Gary Wheeler, and our staff. And there was a board of farmers out of Southeast Missouri that really made that investment of up to $400 million in Southeast Missouri possible. It started with a MASBDA program, which we all know how important MASBDA is to this state. We were able to find the opportunities in Southeast Missouri with their program. And it's an awesome announcement that was just made live yesterday or Monday. I can't remember. So very big win for Missouri. It's a big win for Southeast Missouri with the jobs and the economic development that come with that. So thank you guys for helping us. I think that money in the budget was certainly something that made Cargill decide Missouri was the place instead of Illinois or Arkansas or something else.
A lot of people don't. A lot of people forget where did biodiesel from funding. So, biodiesel is a big deal for Missouri. And like you said, this plant isn't directly related to it, but a lot of that oil will definitely turn into biodiesel. So, sorry.
All right. Representative Hafner, were you going to say something?
Well, Casey, I did. First off, thanks for having me. But the other part of this, before we leave the appropriations, I think that there's one part of the appropriations in the budgeting process. Of course, this was an enormous budget, but I think what we missed on is there was $278 million that was appropriated for infrastructure improvements, but only $100 million of that is going to the rural areas. When you talk about the agricultural opportunities down in the boot heel, you talk about what's happening at the fair, you talk about some of the agricultural facilities down towards my side of the state on the west. We have got to focus the appropriations process not only on the infrastructure, but for improving the roads and bridges in the agricultural communities. $100 million is not going to resolve the problem, and we've got to stay focused on that.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments. And infrastructure is something that we've always supported. And we often forget that on an international stage, infrastructure is what makes Missouri and American farmers always have a competitive advantage over, Southeast America or someone else that's trying to fight for that same market that we have. A little bit towards that infrastructure discussion, let's talk about eminent domain. And that was obviously a huge win for Missouri, and all three of you played a very important role in that. Mike, it's probably most appropriate for you to kind of give a perspective for the folks on the changes through the House. And then, no doubtedly, we'll get into the conversation about the all-night filibuster that ultimately ended in a success for Missouri farmers. But Mike, why don't you touch on some of those specifics for the listeners, if you don't mind?
Sure, Casey. And I start out, and this is a conversation we've had in front of multiple agricultural communities across the state. And we need more farmers in the legislature because Senator Bean, Brad Pollitt, and I, we will all agree we spend way too much time teaching and educating other legislators about Missouri's #1 industry. We need more farmers in the Capitol. That would make things a lot easier. But this was a 10-year effort. I mean, this whole thing with the grain belt's been ongoing for a long time. The property owners are the ones that initiated this process. And Brad and I have been in this fight for the past 4 years, but that fight has been ongoing. And yeah, there was a lot of things that happened, not only within the House, and I know that Senator Bean will talk in detail about the filibuster, part of the negotiation process that took place within the Senate. But as far as the House is concerned, that initial bill that we pushed through was very different than the one last year. And so, Casey, you were involved in it when we were writing that bill right from the beginning. We had 2 eminent domain bills. One had concentrated on the Grain Belt Express, but we knew, given the composition of the Senate, we did not have a pathway to get that approved. There was no way we were going to get that bill to the governor. And so we concentrated on the second bill, House Bill 2005. Very early in the legislative process, we were able to get that through the House. And off the top of my head, we need 82 votes in order to approve a bill. I believe we had 106 there in the House. And the debate lasted about 2 or 3 hours, but we got a lot of support because it was a forward-looking bill. Now, from there, it went over to the Senate. It took about 2.5 months before the negotiation really got going within the Senate. And I'd like to turn it over to Jason Bean at this point and just talk about the process and how the bill started to change once we got into the Senate and what things took place on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate was definitely, going to be the kind of the point where we had to, that's where we are going to make or break. And we started talking with senators as early as January and trying to make them understand that we're really trying to look at a proactive bill. And, by the time we got even to the floor, we weren't quite there yet. There was still some negotiations. But like I say, a lot of work went in on the front side of that to get to where we got to. We brought that bill to the floor about 3:00 in the morning, finally got the vote at 5:45 in the morning. And really, it's kind of surprising that it took that long on the floor, but we had to have 18 votes to pass it out. We got 19. But, there were some really good provisions in that bill. Like I say, looking proactive. I mean, yes, it's kind of hard not to address the grain belt, but I think we knew where we had to be, we had to do that. And like I say, a lot of good people came together. I'll go back to Representative Hafner if he wants to talk about some of the specifics in the bill. But like I say, it took from literally January to the time it hit the floor to get to a good spot.
Yes, and it's important to note too that the main parts of the bill from January until it actually made its way out of the Senate did not change significantly. But what did change is some of the verbiage and to make the statute clearer. So let's go back to the beginning here. And there's a lot that's being said about this. And let me be clear, we as legislators, we as the agricultural industry, we're about economic development. We recognize that that is what's going to push Missouri agricultural forward. We recognize that. And we want to see improvements to the electrical grid, but we do not want to see it taking place on the backs of our farmers and our ranchers. And so the main part of this bill that is very important, and go right back to the Missouri Constitution, right there in Article 1, it talks about that private property shall not be taken without just compensation. And that is a problem that was exacerbated by the grain belt, because they were doing the market evaluations on a county by county basis. That's totally inappropriate because of the productivity value and the changes in the land, the productivity values over 20 or 30 miles. And so what the bill ended up doing right from the beginning in January, it stated that if there's going to be condemnations of agricultural land, because it is a heritage to the farmers, it's a heritage to their families, that needed to be at 150%. And as we went through the negotiating process, that was non-negotiable. That number needed to stay consistent at 150%. And I appreciate that we took a hard line on that. The other part about this that was very important is we needed to make sure that future projects were not going to have the same impact as what happened with Grain Belt. We've got 2 transmission lines that are going to be coming through this summer. They're going to be going before the Public Service Commission and looking for an approval of a certificate. And we wanted to make sure that these projects were going to be good for the state of Missouri. So the bill states very clearly that not only do they need to have substations, because these are there needs to be AC substations, and there has to be substations within the state of Missouri, and there has to be a proportional drop of power within the state of Missouri in order to make it beneficial for the state of Missouri. So Casey just does a quick summary of what that proportionality means. I mean, if it's 20% of the line is actually crossing the state of Missouri. So as an example, if it's a 1,000-mile line and 200 miles is going across Missouri, then 20% of that power needs to be dropped in the state of Missouri. It's got to be good for the state of Missouri. So the verbiage on that changed a little bit different than what we started in January, all the way through the negotiating process. And the other big part of this is it made sure that landowners were protected in the negotiating process when it went into the condemnation proceedings. So I don't want to get real technical about this, but once the condemnation process happens within the courts, if there is not an agreement on what that fair market value is, the court assigns disinterested commissioners. So prior to this bill, the courts could assign anyone to do that. And for us, it was only appropriate that one of them be a farmer with at least 10 years experience in the county and that he understood agriculture. That puts an even negotiating process and allows the farmers to negotiate in good faith.
Yep, that's a really good recap. And, for those that are listening and don't get to experience these all-night filibusters, they're taxing. And I'm not sure if any of us are totally caught up on our sleep yet, but it was awesome to see, because it's, imagine Caleb Browden knew going into this debate that evening that he was going to ride it out with Senator Bean and the others, and Representative Hafner and Paul. I mean, they were there present as these negotiations are going on in Senator Bean's office or the side galleries. I think it was probably 2 or 3 in the morning. We're all still awake trying to drink coffee. And there were some attempts on the floor to put electric cooperatives into the bill, because the opponents of this legislation knew that, one, electric co-ops are different. There's a lot of local buy-in. They shouldn't be a direct piece of this. So there was a standing division called, and it was really neat to me because the senator, Representative Hafner, your ag groups, we're literally running around the hallways, making sure that if these people are asleep, they're getting up, they're coming to the floor, because when there's a standing division, you need to make sure you have a prevailing vote. And it was really cool to see, because everybody stuck it out with you, Senator Bean, and we got 18 people. And at that point, I think it was a good showing, and probably helped ultimately end that all-night filibuster, knowing that we had the 18 votes. But it was super close. We were still trying to count votes when the bill was getting its final third read in the Senate. A lot of hard work went into that bill. So go ahead.
If a lot of people don't understand, when an amendment is put on, it's just a voice vote. And, whoever's loudest in that chamber, the presiding officer can call for that voice vote. So one of the things that we did is, once again, make sure people were ready to vote. And then before the vote ever took place, you had to have one other member with you. And I asked for a standing division to make sure that we knew where our vote was. And we had the votes to kill that amendment, which would have killed the bill. After that amendment was killed, we knew we were in a good spot, because that was really the only spot that they could have killed it on us. And once again, you had to have 18. We actually had 18. Senator Justin Brown was actually at the hospital with a friend, and actually got there just in time to be the 19th vote. So, very, very good night for eminent domain reform. Great night for property rights in the state of Missouri. Great night for farmers and ranchers. And, just to kind of say one thing back to what Representative Hafner said, having that farmer on that disinterested commission is very, very important, because we all know, as farmers, land values in the county, hey, you can go 5 miles and those values can change. And, one thing to always remember, how can we put a value on something we don't want to sell? That's tough. So really the 150% is just a good starting point. But anyway, it was a great night for Missouri farmers and ranchers. And as the representative said, this is 10 years coming.
Yeah, that's really good. And we're going to get ready to jump into the omnibus bill discussion. But I want to commend you all, because oftentimes we seem to sacrifice good for perfect. And this was not the bill filed, but it made some really, really good improvements in the eminent domain reform. And I know that you three are not done, and you'll continue to try to take bites at that apple to make sure that Missouri's eminent domain laws are as strong on behalf of the farmers and ranchers as they can be. So there's a big step forward in that direction. As Mike mentioned, there's already things coming down the line. So as we look into the omnibus ag bill, which it was a bill that a lot of years' works have gone into. Representative Hafner is the chairman of the Joint Committee on Agriculture, and a lot of these provisions were heard through the Joint Committee. Representative Pollitt, Senator Bean, everybody on this call, and many others, including Don Roan, who was the chair of Ag. You all crafted a bill over the summer, knowing that we needed to get it done. Unfortunately, the bill died last year. We can talk about that if you guys would like to, the reasons why it died, but if you'd like to kick it off, Representative Pollitt, a little bit about what's in that omnibus bill that's key for Missouri, and then we can get into the process and talk about how big of a win that is for Missouri.
There's everything in that bill. The the groups, the agriculture in the state of Missouri, the only thing that wasn't really in that bill was eminent domain, which we had the bill that you talked about, and the transparency in cattle markets, which that's a federal issue that Vicki Hartzler's working very hard on. And, you know, being a cattle farmer myself, it's a big deal. And you know, Representative Hafner will tell you, and I don't know, Casey, whether you were listening, we put that ag bill onto a couple other bills and sent them over to the Senate, and they turned around and sent them back. And as we take the ag bill off of the FIFA bill, I spent 5 to 7 minutes basically just lecturing really a group of supporters on the House floor, more so of, yes, the 750 million for FIFA, that's a big deal. And we all want that, but we're turning our back for the most part on the $93 billion that our agriculture community invests in our state every single year. And so there was so much in the bill. It was disappointing that the tax credits had to be pushed back from 6 years to 2, but I think you've got my commitment and the senators as well, that we're going to continue to work on that and try to make things right. We passed some 6-year tax credits this year for organizations that do a heck of a lot less than what agriculture does. And that is the disappointment in that. But, you know, I think I got my point across, and I think everybody listening needs to understand you do have folks there that are working. You know, Greg Sharp, he's all over infrastructure in Northeast Missouri and the importance of doing something for our county roads. And Lewis Riggs, I mean, you had nobody that pushes broadband. That guy's just fixated on broadband, and every day he comes there wanting to do something for broadband for rural Missouri. So you've got folks out there that are working hard on that. And the ag bill, like we said, we had the massive tax credits, we had the biodiesel and ethanol, and we sent that ag bill over to the Senate before the first week of February, and they added some good stuff. I was glad to see some of the stuff that they put on. And you know, the good thing about the ominous ag bill is it is a true bipartisan bill. We had huge support from the other side, from the Democrats, and the Senate was able to put a couple agriculture products for the Democrats on the Senate side, which we didn't put on the House side just because we wanted to get that bill out of there as fast as we could over the Senate. I went over to the Senate and asked them to put those things on that bill, because we had a lot of good votes on that other side, and they needed something in this, and they got some stuff in there. So we had 18, I think, different programs put in the ominous ag bill. Really good bill. The shingles part was kind of something that I just stomached. Not that it's a bad thing. It really doesn't fit, but trying, you know, it's more a strategic thing that it didn't go back over and get filibustered because it was taken out. So we left that in. But, you know, we'll continue to work on these tax credits, and I know there's folks that do have some reservations on the 2 years, but all the ag groups came to me and said, please don't kill this bill because of that. Go ahead, get it to the governor. I think it's your all's jobs now to convince the governor to go ahead and sign it, because he wasn't very happy that went from 6 years to 2 as well, because he is an agriculture governor, and we're very blessed to have him there. And so you guys convince him to sign that, and then you've got our word, all 3 people on this panel, plus the other guys that I mentioned, that will work to get this done right as long as we're there.
Yeah, it was certainly record speed through the House. I mean, that omnibus bill, and for the listeners, you know, omnibus bills aren't usually filed. They're usually crafted in the last 2 weeks, and you take a bunch of single bills and you throw them together, and you're not really sure what was on there. And I think it was strategic by the House to go ahead and file all these provisions together. That way they all had a hearing at one time. They were all commented on at one time. And it really helped to speed up the process through the House. And, you know, Representative Pollitt, he sponsored the bill. Senator Jason Bean carried it through the Senate. And as you've heard with eminent domain reform, the Senate is a tough place to get anything passed. And Jason, you want to comment a little bit on some of the things in the Senate, and then I may take some of that too later.
Yeah, I mean, it's a, you know, a whole lot. And one thing we didn't talk about, remember this, the Senate is a slow deliberative body. I mean, that's on purpose, so it's slow anyway. But then you take a year like this Senate, you got an election year, you got senators running for re-election. We had 6 senators who are termed out, 5 Republicans, 1 Democrat. You've got 4 people in the Senate running for U.S. Congress, 1 running for U.S. Senate. Then you've got the conservative caucus and their deal. So, you know, the Senate is quite a interesting dynamic right now. So, we were actually talking. I was talking about this the other day. What I chose to do is just try to stay out of the fray. And if people want their sound bites for running for office, you do that. But you know what? I chose to take that time to, devote to eminent domain, this ag omnibus bill, and talking to senators, in their office, working through their issues there versus on the floor. So anyway, I should have said that earlier, but when the ag omnibus bill came over to the Senate, we knew there was a problem. There was a provision on there of rural jobs. And no matter how any of us on this call feel about the rural jobs provision, there was a big problem in the governor's office, and there was a big problem with the speaker, and there was also a problem on the ag committee with the Rural Jobs Act in the House. So that's went to work pretty hard to figure out what we could do. I mean, we tried a lot of different things. I mean, we tried to work with everybody to find a workable product, and in the end, we stripped rural jobs off, and that's when we did the 2-year sunset on the tax credits, on the MASBA tax credits, the ethanol, and diesel, which, as Representative Pollitt said, and I agree, you need a 6-year credit sunset. That period, you need that for these programs to work, most of them, or some of them rather. So that was really frustrating to have to go to 2 years. However, if we look at MASBA tax credits have been expired since December 31 of 2021. So this was at least keeping these programs going, and it was something, like I say, none of us want to do, but it keeps things going, keeps things moving in the right direction. And I re-echo Representative Pollitt's words. That'll be one of the first bills I probably file next year, is to extend those tax credits to 6 years. But a lot of good things in that bill. The bill, as we talked about, which basically takes shingles off a house, grinding them up, and having a place to put those out on roads or whatever for dust control or for whatever. Yeah, that was kind of a tough bill to put on there, but in the end, it kept a filibuster from happening. Rural Economic Development Committee, which is designed to look at things in our third-class counties, look at the obstacles we have for bringing industry in, look at opportunities. Thought that was a really good provision in that bill. Something that we don't talk about a lot, but there was an anhydrous ammonia provision in that bill. And a lot of people don't know this, but dealing with air quality right now, you know who deals with that here in our state? The EPA, because it falls under Missouri Department of Agriculture. They can't do it, so it falls under EPA. So this provision moved that air quality to DNR, which keeps it in our state and keeps the EPA in Washington, D.C., which I think we all agree is a good thing. So like I say, a lot of good things. Getting through the Senate, definitely we had some work. Urban farming tax credits came on that bill. Senator Washington, that was a big part of what she wanted to do. There was stuff with logging trucks on there, but going back to one other thing, and when I talked about the Conservative Caucus, the Conservative Caucus and tax credits, that's a hard talk and a hard sale. But if you look at the ROI on these tax credits, they're as high as $7 for every dollar spent. So, as one Conservative Caucus member told me, still can't vote for a tax credit, but if I was going to vote for one, the ag tax credits would be it. So anyway, that's kind of my side from the Senate.
No, that's really good. And I think it's really hard to understand the amount of negotiations and just stress that you get under towards the end of session, knowing that this bill was still out there. And it could have been the second year in a row where all of these important provisions may not have made it across the finish line. And that was a scary thought for a lot of us. And, I know we commend you for being able to find a path forward with those opponents. There were several, and the filibuster is something that's very difficult to get over in the Senate. MASBA is probably, I would say, without a doubt, the most important economic development tool that the state offers when it comes to rural Missouri. And it is imperative that we do whatever it is necessary in the years coming to make sure we get that 6-year sunset, like you all have said. And one of the things that some of our listeners may not know, there's a provision within MASBA. It's called the New Gen Cooperative Tax Credit. And that is one of those tax credits that the 2-year sunset doesn't work well for. I think they'll be able to clear the backlog that they have, and that might be the best, but it keeps them moving forward, and we need to get them renewed. Representative Hafner probably heard from many people that benefited from the New Gen Tax Cooperative or the new gen tax credit, because that program is responsible for starting the ethanol and biodiesel industries in Missouri. And what that tax credit does is it required a 50 or at least 51% majority ownership from farmers in those facilities. And one of the things that Representative Hafner has been trying to do, and we were able to accomplish in this bill, is protect that biodiesel industry that was truly started here by the farmers with their checkoff investment. And why don't you talk about some of the struggles just real quick? I know we're getting close to the end here, and I want to talk about one other very interesting issue. But why don't you talk about some of the struggles over the years and how maybe we ended with a tax credit to help boost Missouri's biodiesel industry?
Well, Casey, you're absolutely right. And this gets into a very complex conversation, but I want to keep it real high level and start off with the fact that agricultural development as it pertains to tax credits and economic development is not understood. As Senator Bean said, the return on investment at the worst, you've got 7, 8, 9 different programs within the agricultural omnibus. Each one returns money to the state, some of them as high as $7, $8, $9 for every one that's invested. But what makes this even more difficult, and we can't control what happens at the federal level, but what we can do is control what happens at the state level. And with the agricultural industry, every state that surrounds the state of Missouri is doing something at the state level to support agriculture. Missouri doesn't do it. We're behind. Why are we not supporting our number one industry? And a perfect example of that comes into biodiesel. And Casey, me and you have talked about this almost on a weekly basis through the entire session. We track what the price is of biodiesel compared to traditional diesel. And you look over the last 2-year period and consistently, because folks tell us, well, it's not a level playing field. And we said, absolutely, it's not, because the federal government subsidizes the petroleum industry from the point of extraction out of the ground until you put it directly from the pump into trucks, into whatever type of vehicle that you're using to drive it. And so we say it's not a level playing field. If it was a level playing field, the key indicator here is over the past 2 years, almost the entire time, biodiesel has been cheaper. And if it was truly a level playing field, then the production in the state of Missouri would be ramping up significantly, and it's not, because the distribution process is an oligopoly. It's controlled by 7 or 8 different companies, and it's hard for Missouri agriculture to break in. And so originally, this started out as a mandate that goes all the way back to 2019, and then it turned over into a tax program. In case that was a lot of the work that you did. I like the way that the bill is set up now because it is driven by economic development. And so when you talk to 2 to 5 cents for a gallon of gas or from biodiesel below 10%, and it jumps up to 5 cents and it's 10%, that is allowing the biodiesel industry within the state of Missouri to compete with those long-term contracts at the distribution level. And so it's extremely important. I know it gets complex, but it's not a level playing field. And we need this in order to further Missouri agriculture.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think I probably speak for most of the people on the call too. I mean, as driving a diesel vehicle, I can't wait for the retailers to get some incentives to sell me a cheaper diesel product that's made here in Missouri. So I can't wait for the governor to sign this bill. It wasn't said, but House Bill 1720, you guys did an amazing job getting that emergency clause on there so that these folks can get back to work right now. Emergency clauses take a 2/3 majority, which is a super majority or a veto-proof majority as it's called. And that's 109 in the House. And we had somewhere around 125 to 130 votes. And in the Senate, that would be 24. And it had both 25, 26, and I think maybe even on the emergency clause, 27 votes. And so that just shows you all the hard work that has gone into this over the years. It's very excited to watch these get to work. There's a retailer's tax credit, but also for those listening, we were able to put in a production tax credit on the biodiesel side. For the first time in history, the driving force of soybean price is the oil versus the meal. So the oil is in such high demand that it is becoming difficult for them to afford when they're making it into biodiesel. So we're going to make sure they keep buying Missouri soybeans. They have a little bit of an incentive to buy that and turn that into diesel or biodiesel. The last thing that the Missouri Senate achieved that we want to talk about is the maps. You know, there has been a lot of discussion about these congressional maps for a lot of different reasons. You all were in a very unique position. Obviously, COVID pushed everything back. Normally, that census would have been prepared earlier. So we squeezed a whole bunch of work into one session, not to mention Senator Roy Blunt, his retirement, and that trickle-down effect that caused with people running for Congress and having maybe some special interest into that process. Senator Bean, why don't you run some of the people through how that came down on the last day of session for you, and then of course the House members that stood strong to try to get a map drawn. And before you do that, though, I think it is very important, because I don't know if you guys can say it, but I will say it. I am really glad to see that the maps were not drawn by the courts, and that you guys stood strong, because the Ag Group supported Amendment 3 years ago, specifically because we wanted the Constitution to require that these maps be drawn to protect these communities, and specifically rural communities that would have otherwise been torn apart. And so you all were able to do that in a way that is a strong 6-2 map. So thank you for that, and go on.
Well, it was definitely a interesting session this year, because everything was always a whisper about the maps, and we had in fact a 30-some hour session on the maps. At one time a map was voted on. Nobody was really very happy with that. You know what, I'm gonna be really honest with you, it kind of came down to 2 senators in St. Charles County that kind of wanted the maps to be a certain way. You heard 7-1, you heard 5-3, 4-4, 6-2, blah blah blah. I've never seen so many maps in my life. I will tell you, the map guy that drew the maps in the Senate for us, I think he's going to change his name from Scott to Rand McNally, because I'm telling you, that guy, I bet he drew 2,000 maps through the year. But anyway, when it came down to it, voted on a map. Now, there was a procedure that was used to get that out of conference, kind of skip a little bit, they'll bring it straight to the floor. And when that was done, to be honest with you, the session was over. We didn't move anywhere after that. We did not have to PQ, but we brought it out of the committee, put it right on the floor, and voted on that. And the map that we ended up with, and now I'm speaking from the 8th District, a lot of us in the 8th District, the senators in the 8th District, felt like the map that we kind of had in front of us that was on the table wasn't necessarily representative of rural Missouri. And being very honest, it had all of Jefferson County in there, which could have kind of probably said who was going to be the next congressperson from the 8th District out of Jefferson County. There were some compromises done. Speaker of the House made some compromises, and half of Jefferson County got put in there. So we felt like it was more representation of rural Missouri. But I will tell you, once again, as I said earlier, all of the factors going into the Missouri Senate this year, this was probably the top factor. And we ended up with a very, very strong 6-2 map, which I think is very representative of the state of Missouri. And Casey, as you said, it kept it out of the courts. And the last thing we wanted was these maps end up in the courts. And that's where we were headed. But like I say, it took some maneuvering in the Senate. The House worked with us very well. I want to commend both Representative Shaw and Senator Bernskoetter for their hard work on that. I will tell you, those guys took a lot of heat over this session. So anyway, I might not describe it the best way in the world, but that's how it ended up. When we did the procedural motion in the Senate, brought it right to the floor. Actually, it took a little bit of time to get to a vote. That's when a lot of senators had their time to do their year-end wrap-ups and their eyes on the floor. But in the end, we passed the map, and shouldn't end up in courts. On the governor's already signed it yesterday, I believe. And like I said, deal, but glad to get that behind us for sure.
Yeah, you and Senator Bernskoetter, I'm sure, you know, I heard him on the floor say that's the last committee he ever wants to chair. He would never want to do that again, and I don't blame him. You know, from you House members, is there a perspective you'd like to share with the listeners regarding the map?
Casey, there is. And I'm going to go back to the foundation of how we do these maps. And what people need to understand, I'd love an 8-0 map. I'd love a 7-1 map, but it goes down to the process and statute, both at the federal level and the state level. And so it doesn't matter what you draw up. If you violate those provisions, it's going to the courts.
Oh, you got muted there, Mike.
Well, I could sum that up in 30 seconds. Okay, both at the state level and federal level, those districts have to be compact. They have to be contiguous. But the key to it is you go back to the Discrimination Act of 1964, and then its companion bill at the federal level, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It states very clearly you cannot break up an area more. You break up Kansas City, you break up St. Louis, or you have a congressional district that stretches halfway across the state, going from Kansas City all the way down to the southern border of Missouri to Arkansas, that's going to end up in the courts. There's no way that's going to pass. So there was a lot of grandstanding as to, I want a 7-1 map, but everybody knew that the end result had to be 6-2 in order to keep it out of the courts, or we were going to lose and end up with a 5-3 or 4-4 map.
You know, Casey, a 7-1 map to me would have been unethical. And our state is a 6-2 state. And the first 7-1 map that we saw in the House, it had Pettis County with 2/3 of Johnson and all of Boone County. Well, rural Missouri put the Republicans in both the houses. And a 7-1 map just wasn't going to fly. And to me, again, it would have been unethical to divide Jackson County out of 1 million folks that live in that area that deserve to be represented, even though we may not agree with what they want, but at the same time, ethically, they needed to be representative. And we went out and campaigned vigorously to overturn Clean Missouri with Amendment 3, basically saying that the Democrats were going to gerrymander the House and Senate boundaries. And that's what we were trying to do with the 7-1 map. And that's where the word rhino came in. And, you know, if you want to criticize us for being ethical, then I guess as politicians, we would like to have that criticism that we're too ethical to do the wrong thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good points. And I know that our farmers, we talked about the maps. You know, Farm Bureau was a lead advocate for that Amendment 3 that you're talking about, that cleaned up the Clean Missouri provisions that would have certainly gerrymandered these districts and ripped apart rural Missouri. The representation would not have been there. You know, and at the best of times, we're a bipartisan organization. Okay. And at the best of times, you see about a 65 Republican vote in this state and a 35 Democrat vote. And with a 6-2 map, Republicans are going to get, you know, 75% of the representation. And I think that that's fair. It's proven to be fair. We're currently a 6-2 state. You can't get a 7-1 map and give Republicans, you know, 84% of the vote in Congress. I mean, there's just no way, to your point, that's ever going to fly. And I think there's a lot of people out there that should understand the stress that you guys will put under now with social media and just all these. There were groups from outside this state just throwing bombs on people just trying to do the right thing. And so, you know, I think
we heard that, you know, California, look what California's trying to do. Look what New York's trying to do. Look what Illinois is trying to do. Well, I can tell you, whatever those 3 states are trying to do, I don't want to do anything. I want to be no part of what those states are doing. And yeah, they were trying to gerrymander maps to get more Democrats in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. But when somebody says, well, California, I usually say, I don't need to hear. I don't want to hear what they're doing.
Yep, that's exactly right. Well, for the first one, gentlemen, appreciate you guys being our guinea pigs here, as well as myself as the moderator. And we're at 12:54, and we covered a lot of really good information. And I just hope that the listeners know, I think that this was a historic session on behalf of agriculture. And a lot of that is due to the 3 of you gentlemen on this phone call. And we look forward to continuing this success over the next few years as we continue to reform eminent domain and look at ways to extend these tax credits. And, you know, Representative Pollitt, I can't wait to see these successes at the fair as it continues to grow. Hopefully we can attract, you know, those world-class shows that you're talking about. But we do have some time if you guys want to have any closing say, I'll go from Senator Bean to Pollitt. I about gave you a raise there. Senator Bean to Representative Pollitt to Representative Hafner, if you guys want to close this out.
Hey, I'll just say quick, it was a great year for agriculture in the Senate, as you said, in the House, as you said. And you know, in an environment that was tough, agriculture definitely was the biggest winner. And hey, I look forward to working with these guys next year and make a great team, and appreciate all their hard work and working with me.
Casey, I would that there's one thing I do want to put a bug in folks' ears on. One of the things that we need to start working on immediately, and I've said this to a couple of the organizations, we need to come up with some type of incentive for our farmers in the state of Missouri to sell their land to younger farmers. And without some type of incentive to do that, you know, our average age is 61, I think, and that's not going to change when you've got big corporate farms that are willing to give what they're giving for the land. And so, you know, I think we need to start looking at a bill that would give an incentive for a farmer who wants to retire to sell his land to a younger guy or gal that want to be a farmer, because right now that's impossible to do with the input cost and the cost of the land that they have to buy. And we really need to do something to try to keep our family farms in the state of Missouri for the next generation.
That's great, Mike. Before you go, I just want to say I appreciate that comment. It's something that I believe our farmers have talked about, and maybe Iowa. Brad, you may know this. I think maybe Iowa recently got something done to that effect, but I think we would be behind you on that one.
Yeah. So if Iowa did pass something, and I'm more than proud to carry that. If the organizations would get, you know, come up with a little different ideas on what to do, because if we don't, you know what's going to happen. Bigger corporate farms, and I'm nothing against that. I'm just saying, if you want the real family, you know, what I said on the House floor was that the only reason rural Missouri, rural America signs a contract on anything anymore is because the law pretty well demands it. A handshake is what my dad told me when I was little. You shake somebody's hand, that's all you got. And if you don't hold up whatever you should to, and that's where Senator Bean and I got on the omnibus bill. We made some commitments that our word had to stand. And I'm telling you, I sat in my office a couple times and looked at the picture of my dad. I said, Dad, I'm not going to let you down. No matter what it takes, I'm going to do what you told me I better do when I was little. And, you know, those things come back, and that's real Missouri. That's real agriculture. Yeah,
I think if you hadn't done that, I don't think this bill would have got done. I think the commitment that the two of you made, Brad, Jason, and Mike, yourself, if you hadn't stuck to your word, this bill never would have got done. So thank you for that. Representative Hafner, you got any closing remarks you'd like to throw out there?
Well, Casey, I am encouraged of the partnership that we have. Not only do we have a strong team in the Missouri House, there's a strong team in the Missouri Senate. I appreciate Senator Bean. I appreciate Senator Bernskatter. There's a lot of folks over in the Senate that are supporting Missouri agriculture. But the challenge is great. There's some things happening that are very concerning at the federal level. And we're continuing to engage the Missouri congressional delegation. And when we talk about eminent domain, what is happening with the current administration? You know, they have put not only executive orders out there, but there are laws that have been signed that said that states' rights will be bypassed by the federal government. And that is absolutely positively wrong. And we got to stay engaged on that fight. What is happening with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission right now could have a huge impact on Missouri agriculture. And so we're engaged on that fight. I know that you're part of that. I know Farm Bureau is part of that. But we have got a lot more work to do.
Well, farmers and ranchers and landowners don't have any stronger representation than they do on this call. And so we want to thank you for that. And I know that you, Representative Hafner, are running for floor leader of the House, which is an important race. And we wish you the best of luck. We know that you could have a lot of impact in that. I'm sure you all will be chairmen or floor leaders, or you're looked at as leaders from your peers. That's very evident in the General Assembly. So I want to thank our listeners for taking the time, and thank the three of you. I know that you're very busy, and Senator Bean, you're ready to go out there and either jump in a sprayer or jump in a planter, one or the other. And so, Mike, drive safe. I want to thank you guys for your time, and hopefully we'll get to do this again. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Casey.
You bet. Thank you, gentlemen.